Hey guys, what is going on? So today I wanted to talk about training frequency and how it relates to muscle growth, as well as training frequency relating to strength training and how we can kind of maximize both of those things at different times so we can build size and strength over the long haul. And so the first thing I do want to talk about is muscle growth, because I think that's probably the most important thing that most people are after. But I do want to talk about as well how that relates to strength training and how we can kind of hack this system of having high frequency in some areas as well as low frequency in others. And so when it comes to training frequency, there is this idea that's floating around the internet that essentially you have elevated muscle protein synthesis for about 2 days after training, and then you start to see muscle protein breakdown. And if you do something like a bro split, you're essentially building up only to lose all your gains throughout the week. Now, how true is this? Well, I do think this depends on a variety of factors, as does everything when it comes to lifting. But when we're talking about averages, this is generally true. As we can get more bouts of training frequency and more spikes in protein synthesis, that's going to be better overall. However, this is going to depend on your genetics. It's going to depend on how long you've been training. It's going to depend on your volume. And so I'm going to talk about how those things affect how much you should be training a certain muscle group. So training age, generally, when you are newer to the gym, you can have higher spikes in muscle protein synthesis and not have to deal with the degradation. And so something along the lines of a bro split is going to work totally fine for a newer lifter. And this is just generally true across the board. When you are a newer lifter, so many different things can work, and you have to get more dialed in with structure in your training as you get more advanced. But when it comes to doing something like a bro split, that elevated muscle protein synthesis that we're getting and that subsequent breakdown that we're getting after potentially a week of not training a muscle group, it's not really something that you need to worry about too much. But as you get more advanced, you're getting less of that overall synthesis, and therefore you need to be more worried about hitting a muscle group more frequently so you can have an overall net gain by the end of the week or the end of the month or whatever it is. And so training age is going to be the first thing. The second thing is going to be genetics. I have noticed that as some people advance, they just need more and more frequency to continue to grow. And when they increase their frequency, sometimes they see these very sudden improvements, both in terms of their size and strength, while other people, they continue to do bro splits, or maybe they dial back the frequency as they get more advanced, and they actually notice that when they do something like a bro split, they can continue to get good results even if they're more advanced. And so I think as our training age improves, and if we start to see that kind of switch over and we start to get a beneficial outcome from doing a bro split, well, I think genetics are very much a factor there as well. So we can look at the general population and be like, okay, well, they start to see muscle protein breakdown after this period of time. But some people may be able to achieve a higher protein synthesis level depending on genetics, as well as, their training intensity, their volume, everything like that. And so that person may get a better outcome from a bro split than somebody else. And so just because you see it working for one person doesn't mean it's going to work for you. And just because a certain method works for you doesn't mean it can't, the opposite can't be true for somebody else. So that's just something to keep in mind there. And then we also could talk about volume. So generally speaking, as you do more sets in a workout, you're going to get a larger stimulus effect, but there's going to be diminishing returns. So your second set is going to be less stimulating than your first. Your third is going to be less stimulating than your second. But as you get a cumulative amount of stimulus, as you do more volume, the overall synthesis amount that you're getting from that single workout is going to be higher. And so that's why something like a bro split, you're getting a much larger spike in terms of overall synthesis, and therefore you're going to be able to have a longer time away from the gym before you train that muscle group again. Thus, that's why that type of training can work if you are pairing it with more volume in your session. However, if you do one set, the overall stimulus that you're going to get from that one set in the workout is not going to be as high, but if you pair that with a higher frequency technique, then you can approach that in a different way than somebody who's doing a bro split. So when we factor in our volume, our training age, frequency, and all those things as they relate, a lot of that is going to come down to personal preference and what we prefer in terms of the amount of volume that we want to do in one session. So if you're somebody who can potentially hit arms all day long and you can just do an entire arm day, which I think generally people can do because there's not a whole lot of fatigue training arms, then you can get a very good outcome training arms one time a week. However, once we start to get really strong and we do a leg day, you may find that halfway through your leg day, you're just absolutely toast. And that's something that I experienced. And so as opposed to having one leg day, which historically has worked for me, I started splitting that into 2 different leg days because that way I can do, the same amount of volume across 2 different days. I can have higher training frequency and I can get way better exercises or way better sets in each session. And that works a lot better for me, both in terms of not wanting to, go to the gym on my leg days, but also just generally having better enjoyment on those days across the board because I'm able to fit in things like arms and, other exercises as well. And I can be really fresh by having just a few exercises that I have to do on that first day. And then I can get, a couple days of rest and I can come back and I can do it again. And so as we kind of relate that to which muscle group that we're training, generally I would say legs is something you want to hit multiple times a week because as you get more advanced, the amount of weight that you have to hit and just the overall fatigue that you're going to get from training legs, it does make sense to split that up into 2, maybe even 3 sessions. Or you can do something along the lines of maybe doing your leg extensions or your leg curls. On a third day, maybe you want to do 2 half leg days and then do a third day where you're just doing more isolations that aren't as fatiguing. But the overall volume that you accrue is going to depend on the muscle group and what you personally can tolerate. And if you can continue to have good sets throughout that exercise, you may be able to do 2 dedicated arm days and that's going to go great for you. And somebody else, 1 dedicated leg day or 1 dedicated back day is just going to be too much. And so this really comes down to just experimenting and seeing like, hey, depending on how strong I am, depending on how fatigued I get from my back exercises or my arm or my chest or my legs, whatever it is, you can kind of determine, are you getting quality sets towards the end of that workout? And so I think when we look at it from this perspective, we can build our general training program around our own personal preferences and how fatigued we get. And a lot of this just depends on like, hey, how much weight are you using? If you're somebody who benches 500 pounds, you're probably not going to want to bench 500 pounds multiple times a week. Or if you are going to do that, you're going to want to do, very few sets on your bench days, right? And so that's going to be very different from somebody who's benching 225. And that person who's benching 225 may be able to do multiple sets 4 times a week and recover totally fine. Again, that's going to depend on the individual. Now, in terms of how that applies to strength training, well, generally, we don't need a tremendous amount of frequency to continue to improve strength, even as we're not gaining muscle mass. We can actually see improvements in strength just from a neurological adaptation level. And so just by doing the exercise, we are getting better at it. And that's something that we can do. We don't even need to go to failure. We don't even need to go hard. We can just get practice reps in with a lighter weight and we can get more proficient at that movement. So if we are trying to gain strength just for the sake of it, which is generally something we're doing with something like a bench press or a deadlift or something like that, doing very sub-maximal sets that are, not very fatiguing at all, that's going to be a good way to get that neurological adaptation as well as just, get to the point where you're getting a little bit more volume in throughout the week without sinking yourself into this big hole of fatigue that you would get if you're, taking your deadlifts to failure or your RDLs to failure or something along those lines. And so as things get heavier, and as the lift requires more muscle groups, it's going to be more fatiguing. And so if we can dial back that intensity, that's going to be a way for us to get more strength adaptations without accumulating too much fatigue in the process of doing that. So that's one way to go about it. Another one would be if we want to improve our strength without really trying to improve the amount of muscle mass that we're getting. Let's say, for example, we just aren't super focused on training legs, so we don't have to kill ourselves in our leg sessions. Well, we can actually just train legs 1 time a week, dial back the intensity, and still get those strength adaptations over time while we sink a lot of our volume into other things that we care about more. Let's say, for example, you really wanted to grow your bench press. you could still improve your, squat strength by improving your, squat technique, by having more frequency, but dialing back that intensity on your squats. But then when you do your bench, you can still bench multiple times a week. You can put more volume into that, or you can just do more chest training overall. And thus you're going to be able to improve in the muscle groups that you really care about while improving the strength in other, exercises that you still want to improve in terms of the overall strength that you have, but you're not as focused on the muscle growth and the total amount of fatigue that you would need to accumulate to grow something like your legs or, other body parts. You may not want to commit that overall volume, that overall intensity that's going to accumulate more fatigue over time. So the way that I kind of approach this is just have, the muscle groups that you're trying to prioritize, and have the lifts, if you are focused on strength in that scenario, have the lifts that you want to grow the most, and obviously you can include more frequency on those. Have the muscle groups that you want to grow the most and have more frequency. You can take those closer to failure. And then other things that you want to put on the back burner, you don't have to stop doing them completely, and you can still take them somewhat close to failure. But as you're getting more advanced and as those weights are improving more and more, doing something like a squat where you're, going above 80% of your 1 rep max, that can still be very fatiguing if you are staying, further away from failure. And in that case, I just think dialing back the intensity and dialing back the frequency on your squats for the short term is going to be beneficial in getting more volume in those areas that you care about in the long term. And you can absolutely switch this as well. If you're really trying to grow your legs, you're really trying to grow your squat, maybe you need to bring your bench press and, bring back the frequency on that. Maybe you need to just not go super hard in your arm training or whatever it is. But obviously all of this is very individual, and you need to prioritize whatever muscle group that you care about, whatever lift that you care about. But we can kind of slide the dial up on certain things while we bring other things down in terms of frequency and intensity. And that's going to lower our overall fatigue threshold that we don't want to get over in terms of being able to continue to grow muscle mass. So hopefully that can be beneficial in terms of structuring a program and, structuring how you actually want to prioritize certain muscle groups at certain times of the year. Or if you just want to keep everything kind of the same, you can go for that 2 times a week frequency, 3 times, but just understand how the fatigue in some areas bleed over into others, and how that overall fatigue is going to be affected as we do more volume. And thus you may need to slide the dials up or down on your frequency or volume depending on that. So hopefully that can be beneficial for some of you guys. Anyway, that's all I got to say about that. I'll keep you updated, and I'll talk to you soon.